Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon the time zone you are in. Thank you so much for taking your valued time for attending this session today. First of all, I would like to thank Gregor and Richard for giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak for Festive Tech Calendar 2020. Merry Christmas, one and all. So today in this session, I'm going to present on the topic SQL Engine, its working style. So basically this session is all about SQL Server internals and architecture. So hopefully you like it. So let me first introduce myself a little bit. My name is Deepthi Kokuri and I am a database administrator with 7 years of experience in managing SQL Server and databases. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer and Microsoft certified solution expert. I did my master's in computer technology at Eastern Illinois University and I blog for dbanuggets.com. That's my website down below. And you can contact me on Twitter at dbanuggets. That's my user ID. If you have any questions regarding this session later, please do not hesitate to contact me. So what are we going to discuss in this session today? We are going to see the overview of ACID properties of transaction with a very simple example ensuring the ACID property. We are also going to see the different types of memory architecture we have in the SQL Server, what all the components we have in the memory architecture of SQL Server. In this session, we are mainly focusing on the plan cache and the buffer pool and how these cache get managed inside the SQL engine. We are also going to see the life cycle of a query for the read as well as the write transaction, like what happens behind the scenes when a query is sent to the SQL Server. We are also going to see the different types of components we have in the SQL engine. That's relational engine as well as the storage engine. So internals, why should we actually care, right? Many DBAs and developers, they work with SQL Server on daily basis, but might not understand what happens behind the scenes when we submit a query to the SQL Server. So knowing this information will help you in understanding how queries are processed at each stage inside the SQL engine. It will also help you in tracking down the performance issues very quickly and fix them efficiently. It will also build you the confidence while managing the database engine as well as the databases. It will also help you in convincing your coworkers or managers of why they have to take your ideas seriously. Last but not least, we work with SQL Server every day. So the more we know about the internals, the better we can understand how SQL engine as well as the databases work. So let's start with the basics, right? The ACID properties. So every major relational engine, it can be the SQL Server, Oracle, PostgreSQL, Sybase. All these major relational engines should satisfy the ACID properties of transaction. What is this ACID? A stands for atomicity. Atomic meaning a single unit of work. A single transaction can contain one operation or it can contain multiple operations in it. Whenever a transaction is running to the SQL Server, all the operations inside that transaction should either complete successfully or none of them. For example, we have a store procedure. Inside that store procedure, we have an update statement as well as an insert statement in it. Whenever we execute that store procedure, both the operations inside that particular transaction should either complete successfully or none of them. For example, if the update succeeds and if the insert fails, then the SQL Server should go ahead and roll back the entire transaction. That's atomicity. C stands for consistency. The data inside the database should always be consistent before starting the transaction and after completing the transaction. For example, I wanted to do an update onto a table, and while I am doing that update, if something happens suddenly in between, like if there was a power outage and if we had to restart the SQL Server, once we restart the SQL Server, the uncommitted transaction should be completely rolled back, making the data in the consistent state. That's consistency. I stands for isolation. No matter how many concurrent transactions are running at the same time, each and every individual transaction should be independent of each other without interfering with any other transaction. That's isolation. Like for example, I wanted to insert couple of records into a table, and while I am doing that insert, none of the other transactions should be interfering with my transaction. That's isolation. D stands for durability. So once the transaction is successfully completed and all the data that has been already modified to the database should be permanent. Like for example, if I had to restart the SQL Server later, once I restart the SQL Server, all the committed data that has already been made to the database should be permanent without any data loss. That's durability. So what components of the SQL engine will ensure this ACID properties of transaction? Atomicity is very easy to be ensured. It is taken care by the parse component inside the relational engine. Consistency is also very easy to be ensured. It is taken care by the parser and binder components inside the relational engine. Isolation is all about the locking mechanism. It is taken care by the lock manager inside the storage engine. Durability is the most toughest of all. It is taken care by the transaction log inside the storage engine. So once the atomicity, isolation and durability are ensured, consistency will automatically be ensured. Let's see a very simple example ensuring the ACID properties of transaction. In our example, let's take a very simple bank transaction. Like for example, I have a balance of $500 in my account, which is having account 1, and I would like to send $100 to my friend's account, which is having of an account 2. So this particular transaction have two operations in it, right? First, we have to deduct $100 from my balance, and then we have to credit $100 to my friend's account. So I can do this very simple bank transaction multiple ways, right? I can use the online application, or I can even use the mobile phone application to do that, right? In this particular example, let's take the mobile phone application to do that. So once I begin the transaction, SQL Server will also go ahead and begin the transaction behind the scenes. It will first go ahead and deduct $100 from my balance where ID is 1. This is the first operation, so it will make it as $400. So the second operation is to credit $100 to my friend's account, right? But I suddenly see this on my screen. I am logged out of the mobile phone application and I see this alert saying facility is temporarily unavailable. Now wait, what? What has happened? I'm in between the transaction. My transaction is not completed yet. So I do not know if my friend has received $100 or if I lost my $100. So I immediately called her to know if she received any money, which she said she didn't. So I immediately called the bank customer service guys to ask what has happened. They said there was a severe thunderstorm and some of their SQL Server went down and they already restarted them. So just imagine if this particular transaction is ensuring ACID properties of transactions, what should happen? Let's see what will happen. Once they restarted the SQL Server, the uncommitted transaction should be entirely rolled back, making the data in the consistent state. This particular transaction is ensuring the ACID property of transaction. Now how? Atomicity is ensured by rolling back the entire transaction, right? The consistency is also ensured. Consistency is ensured by reflecting $500 in my balance, which is the initial amount before starting the transaction. So consistency is also ensured. I stands for isolation, right? The isolation property is also ensured here. Now how? Did you observe like when SQL Server went ahead and deduct $100 from my balance, none of the other transactions were interfering with my transaction, right? So the isolation is also ensured. The durability is also ensured. Like I do not lose my money, my $100 is back, and my balance, $500, is reflecting in my balance, which is the initial amount before starting the transaction. So the durability is also ensured. That's how each and every transaction of all these relational databases should ensure the ACID properties of transaction. Now let's see the overview of SQL Server memory architecture. SQL Server Engine is a Windows program which will allocate Windows APIs, SQL Server Engine is a Windows program which will use the Windows APIs to allocate memory to the SQL Server. Now there are different types of cache we have in the memory architecture of SQL Server, right? In this particular session, we are mainly focusing on the plan cache and the buffer pool. But let's see what other components we have in the memory architecture of SQL Server. The first one, the plan cache, which is one of the major components. It holds the store procedures, query plans, etc. The buffer pool, which is the biggest components of all. It will hold the 8 KB data pages as well as the index pages in it. Now there are also other type of cache like log cache, token and perm user store cache. Now what this token and perm user store cache does is it will store the user permissions onto the objects. There is also other type of cache known as column store cache. It will store the column store indexes in it. Now all these caches which you are seeing in the blue color are very special. Now why I say that? Because they are very special because they can be easily expanded and shrinked when there is a memory pressure. Now why they can be easily expanded and shrinked? Because they have a backing mechanism in them. Whenever there is a memory pressure, all the objects inside these caches will be evicted out of these caches and they will be saved to their storage systems, right? But what about the fixed memory which you are seeing in the green color? Fixed memory is known as fixed because it cannot be expanded or shrinked when there is a memory pressure. Now why it cannot be expanded or shrinked? Because there is no backing mechanism in them, right? But what kind of things will be stored inside this fixed memory? The connections to the SQL Server, like the connections, the memory grant connections for the hashes and sorts, those kind of things will be used in the fixed memory. Now less than 1% of the memory will be allocated for this fixed memory. Now there is also other type of memory known as SQL Server.exe overhead memory. As you know, the SQL Server.exe is an executable and many things will be running this executable, right? For example, the thread stacks. Now even this type of memory will come under the memory architecture of SQL Server. There is also other type of memory known as in-memory OLTP. This in-memory OLTP also comes under the fixed memory. Now what things will be saved inside this in-memory OLTP? Memory optimized tables will be stored. Now as this is a fixed memory, it cannot be shrinked and expanded when there is a memory pressure, right? So there should be some other process which should be kicked in to clean up all these objects inside the in-memory OLTP such that there will be space for the newer objects to be stored inside it. That's the overview of SQL Server memory architecture. Now let's see how the plan cache and the buffer pool gets managed, right? There is something known as LRUK algorithm, which is also known as least recently used algorithm. The -K is for the complexity of the code. Now what is this LRU? LRU meaning if something is staying in the cache for the longer time, those kind of things will be discarded first. But what happens with the SQL Server? If there is an execution plan, for example, which is created with less amount of cost and resources, those kind of execution plan will be discarded first. But what happens with the execution plan which is created with so many resources, which use so many resources and cost? Those kind of execution plans will have many chances to store inside the cache for longer time. Now how does this memory gets managed? There is something known as lazy writer and ghost cleanup, which will manage the plan cache. Now let's see how these two processes work. This is my plan cache, the right side diagram which you are seeing, which is very, very small. We just have 3 execution plans in it, the plan 1, plan 2 and plan 3. Now each and every object we have in the plan cache have 2 numbers at the bottom of each object. The left side number is known as complexity code value and the right side number is known as complexity countdown value. Now what happens is the lazy writer will be kicked in every minute by the SQL server automatically. Now whenever it gets kicked in, what it does is it will go ahead and check if there are any least recently used execution plans. Now in our example, none of them will be used. So what the lazy writer does is it will go ahead and decrement the complexity countdown value by 1 on each of the object it thinks it doesn't get used. So in our example, none of them will be used. So what the lazy writer does is it will go ahead and decrement the plan 1 complexity countdown value from 18 to 17, for the plan 2 from 9 to 8, and for the plan 3 from 2 to 1. And then the lazy writer will go away. In the very next minute, the lazy writer will kick back in again to see if there are any least recently used execution plans. In our example, none of them will be used again. So what it does is it will go ahead and decrement the plan 1 complexity countdown value from 17 to 16, for the plan 2 from 8 to 7, and for the plan 3 from 1 to 0. Now did you observe the complexity countdown value for the plan 3 has turned to 0. That means the SQL server should go ahead and discard that plan 3 out of the cache, right? But that is not what it is going to happen. There is some other process known as ghost cleanup, which will be kicked in every few minutes by the SQL server automatically. Now what it does is it will go ahead and check if there are any objects that have no countdown value. Now once it finds them, it will flag them as ghosted. That means they are still in the cache, but they are in the half-life. For example, there is a memory pressure tomorrow, right? For example, the ghost cleanup will be kicked in automatically by the SQL server every few minutes, right? In that case, the ghost cleanup will go ahead and discard these ghosted execution plans out of the cache. But if there is no memory pressure, these execution plans are still going to stay inside the plan cache, such that some other user might come tomorrow and use the same execution plan for their queries. That's how the ghost cleanup works. In the very next minute, the lazy writer will kick back in again to see if there are any least recently used execution plans. In our example, the plan 2 will be used. So what the lazy writer does is it will go ahead and increment the plan 2 complexity countdown value to its original value, right? We have the complexity countdown value currently as 7. So it will go ahead and change the plan 2 complexity countdown value from 7 to its original value, which is 9. That's how the lazy writer works. Now let's see how the buffer pool works. Buffer pool, basically it have to hold the 8 KB data pages and the index pages in it. Basically the buffer pool has to handle 3 kinds of different structures: the heaps, clustered indexes, and non-clustered indexes. So for example, if you wanted to do a select star from a heap table, you know what will happen. The buffer pool has to go ahead and grab all those data pages, 8 KB data pages, into its memory, the buffer pool, and then do the modification over there, which is very IO intensive. But instead of that, if you put a clustered index and the non-clustered index on the top of it, then the buffer pool has to go only few trips to the database disk subsystem to grab these data pages into the buffer pool, which can reduce the number of IO and then speed up the query process, right? So how does this buffer pool will get managed? There is something known as checkpoint process. Now what this checkpoint process does is it will go ahead and check if there are any dirty pages inside the buffer pool. It will go ahead and check basically. Now what are these dirty pages? Dirty pages are the pages which are already modified inside the buffer pool, but they are not yet hardened them onto the database file system. Now this particular checkpoint process will be kicked in every few minutes by the SQL server automatically. Now what it does, it will go ahead and grab all these dirty pages which are already modified inside the buffer pool. These are 8 KB data pages. These pages will be pushed back to the database file system and harden them onto the database file system, such that there will be more space inside the buffer pool for the newer data pages or index pages to be fit in. That's how the checkpoint process will manage the buffer pool. Now let's see how the SQL optimizer will choose the plan. As you know, the SQL optimizer is a cost-based optimizer. It always wanted to choose the good enough plan instead of the best plan. Now what is the difference? The time and the cost is the difference. For example, we have a very simple select statement here on the left side, which have a 4-table join in it. For example, if the SQL optimizer wanted to choose the best plan instead of the good plan, what it have to do? Each of the table here in this example have a clustered index and the 3 non-clustered index on the top of each table. Now in order to find the best plan out of this query, for this particular query, the optimizer have to go ahead and analyze 72 different types of physical access methods per table. Like whether it have to go ahead and do the clustered index scan or seek, or whether it have to do an ordered clustered index scan, or whether it have to use the covering index. Those kind of physical access methods, 72 per table. We have a 4-table join here, right? That means 72 times 4, those many physical access methods. On the top of it, the optimizer have to go ahead and analyze 24 different types of logical join orders. Now what are these logical join orders, right? We have a 4-table join statement here. For example, the join between A to B will filter out 60% of the records from the result set, and the join between B to C will filter out 90% of the records from the result set. Then the optimizer will go ahead and reorder the join in such a way that it will push back the join between B to C front of the statement and rest of the joins, that is A to B join, back of it. Now why the optimizer do that is because it wanted to grab the results as quickly as possible. On the top of it, SQL Server should go ahead and analyze so many transformation rules that out of analyzing all these transformation rules, it will gather approximately 26,000 possible plans. And from those plans, the optimizer have to choose the best out of them, which is like very, very resource consuming, right? Like no user wanted to wait for such long time to get the results. So instead of that, what the optimizer does is it will go ahead and analyze some of the transformation rules so that it can get the good enough execution plan as quickly as possible. That's how the optimizer works. Now I would like to thank Kevin Klein for loaning me this example. If I explain the same concept in a very simple words, for example, if the optimizer choose the execution plan A in 3 milliseconds and the execution plan B in 3.5 milliseconds, and in order for the optimizer to know if the plan A is better or B is better, it have to go ahead and analyze so many transformation rules for 5 minutes. The optimizer doesn't want to do that. It will just go ahead and grab the plan A or plan B randomly. That's the reason why the optimizer is so quick in getting the good enough plan. Now let's see the life cycle of a query. So if the life cycle of a query is divided into 3 different steps, then the first step contains the components parser, binder, simplification, and the trivial plan. Now all these components from the first step are very lightweight and very easy to the SQL Server. All the SQL Server needs is just the query as well as the table definitions. That's all it needs. When you come to the second step contains the components load metadata, join heuristics, and search phases. Now, most of the metadata that it requires to process any query are gathered at this second step. When you come to the third step contains the components access methods, transaction manager, and buffer manager. Now these components from the third step, the buffer manager component which you are seeing in the third step, is very resource consuming, right? And IO intensive, because the buffer manager has to go and grab the database pages from the disk subsystem, which is very IO intensive. So when you compare the first step and second step and the third step is resource consuming. So the first step components and the second step components comes under the relational engine, and the third step component comes under the storage engine. This is an overview of the SQL engine, like what components we have inside the SQL engine. Now let's see how the select query works behind the scenes. For example, we have a user here who wanted to do a select onto the SQL server, right? Now, no matter what kind of interface he is using, he can be using SQL Server Management Studio, Azure Data Studio, .NET Visual Studio, or even a third-party application. No matter what kind of interface he is using, he should first get the secure network connection to the SQL Server. Now, how does he get that? There is something known as SQL Server Network Interface, which is also known as SNI. Now, what this SNI SQL Server Network Interface does is, it will establish a secure network connection between the SQL operating system as well as the client. Now, the client is our user here. Now, how does the SNI do that? SNI will use the internet protocols to establish the secure network connection. Now, there are different types of internet protocols, right? The TCP, IP, shared memory, named pipes. No matter what kind of internet protocol we use, the process remains the same. So once a secure network connection has been established between the SQL operating system as well as the user, then the query that the user is sending to the SQL server is wrapped inside a tabular data stream packet, which is also known as a TDS packet. Now this particular TDS packet is given to the SQL operating system by the SNI. So once the TDS packet has reached to SQL operating system, the SQL operating system will identify that coming connection as a SQL connection, and it will first assign a SPID to it. You know the SPID, right? Whenever you do SP-who2 or SP-who, you see those SQL process IDs, the SPID number 65, SPID number 94. Those SPIDs are the active connections which are made to the SQL server. So once the SPID has been assigned by the SQL operating system, that particular tabular data stream packet will be unwrapped by the SQL operating system and identify that query as the SQL query, and that particular query will be now sent to the first step of the relational engine. Now the first step of the relational engine is the parser. Parser, what it does is, this particular component will identify the syntactical errors in the query we are sending to the SQL server. So for example, if you wanted to do a select star from, but by mistake you have given select star from, then at that particular scenario, the parser will identify that as a syntactical error and throw back the error to the user, saying that is syntactically incorrect. And also the variables are declared here. For example, if you are using any variables, whether they are declared properly or not, those kind of things are identified here. And views are expanded here. For example, if you are using a view inside your query, then the code text behind that view will be brought in line into the query we are sending. And with all this information, the parser, what it does is, it will first put a hash on the query we are sending, and it will go ahead and check against the hash of the execution plan inside the plan cache. If it finds the very exact match, then it will go ahead and use the same execution plan from the plan cache to its execution phase. But what if it doesn't find any similar execution plan, right, with the same match? It will go ahead and build the initial logical tree for the first time. And then our query will be now sent to the binder component. Now what happens at this binder component is, the check user permissions happens. like whether the user who is running the query have enough permissions to those objects or not. Those kind of things are checked here. And the binder will validate and identify the objects we are using in our query. The parser will just identify and validate the syntax of the query, but the binder is the one which will validate and identify the objects inside the query. And data type resolution happens here. Like data type resolution meaning, for example, if you are doing a select star um, from two tables, where you are using the union all clause in between, the ordinal column of those two tables should be matched in their data type. Those kind of things are checked here. The aggregate binding happens here, like the sum, average, those kind of things are bound here. Now with all this information, the binder will go ahead and update the parse tree inside the plan cache, and now our query will be sent to the simplification component. As the name itself says, it will simplify the query, right? For example, you are doing a select and in your query you have a subquery in it. The simplification component will go ahead and convert that subquery into a very simple join. Now, no matter how many times you run a query with a subquery in it, behind the scenes, simplification will go ahead and convert that into a very simple join. Now, contradiction detection also happens here. Like if you have a foreign key contradiction, those kind of things will be checked here. And with all this information, the parse tree will be updated once again inside the plan cache. And now our query will be sent to the trivial plan component. Now what happens at the trivial component is, for example, if we are sending a very simple query to the SQL Server, for example, like select star from a table or select star from a table with a very simple where clause, then those kind of queries are taken to the SQL Server. Like SQL Server will think this way, this is such an easy query, why should I even go ahead and update the parse tree inside the plan cache that these other components have been built until now? I will just go ahead and discard that parse tree inside the plan cache, and then I will create a trivial plan on the fly because it doesn't cost me any resources or money to do that. No matter how many times the user will send the same kind of query, very simple query, I will go ahead and create the trivial plan on the fly. And basically these trivial plans by default are not stored inside the plan cache. But what if those trivial plans are generated, those trivial plan will be used for the execution phase. But what if we don't have that easy query, right? If our query has very complicated logic in it with 10 table joins, with a complicated logic in it, with group bys, order bys, those kind of things, then that particular query will be treated as a little bit complicated, and that query will be sent to the second step of the relational engine. Now let's think our query is a complicated one, right? Now it will go to the second step of the relational engine. Now the first step inside the second step of the relational engine is the load metadata component. Now most of the metadata that it requires to process any query are gathered at this component. For example, the index statistics and histograms. Statistics are the blob structures which are stored inside the system tables to describe the distribution of the data inside a column or set of columns or an indexed view. Now, the optimizer will trust these statistics to determine how many rows are going to come back out of the table. Though these kind of details are gathered here. Auto create statistics also happens here. If your property like auto create statistics property is turned on the database level, which is by default it is turned on, whenever it is turned on, if the SQL Server think there is a use that it have to go ahead and create the statistics. For example, if you are running a select statement and doing and constantly searching by a column in the where clause, and that particular column is not in the key columns of your index, then the SQL Server will go ahead and auto create statistic on that particular column, even though that column doesn't have any index on it. Cardinality estimates are also gathered here. Cardinality meaning how many number of rows that the optimizer think they will come back out of each operator inside the query tree. Those kind of things are gathered here. SQL Server and Windows collation are checked here. Set options are also checked here. Like for example, whether you have put the set XML on or off, set ANSI padding on or off. Depending upon on or off, the query tree might be dependent the execution plan. Now with all this information, the parse tree inside the plan cache is once again updated, and then our query will be now sent to the join heuristic component. Now I have described the join heuristic, the reordering of the join in our previous slides, but let me discuss that one more time. Like for example, we have a very simple select statement with 3 table join in it, right? For example, the join between A to B will filter out 70% of the records from the result set, and the join between B to C will filter out 99% of the records from the result set. SQL Server will go ahead and reorder the join in such a way that it will push back the join between B to C front of the statement and the join between A to B back of it. Now why the optimizer do that is because it wanted to grab the results as quickly as possible. Now with all this information, the parse tree inside the plan cache is once again updated, and then our query tree will be now sent to the search phases. Now in the very next slide, I'm going to discuss what these search phases are. But for now, please remember that our optimizer, the SQL optimizer, is cost-based optimizer. It always want to choose the good enough plan. Now, no matter what kind of query we are sending to the SQL Server, the optimizer have to go ahead and grab the good enough plan from these 3 phases, the phase 0, phase 1 and phase 2. Once it finds the good enough plan from these 3 phases, it will go ahead and update that plan inside our plan cache, and finally it will put a hash on it, and then our query will be now sent to the third step of the storage engine. Right? Before going into the third step of storage engine, let's see what these search phases are. Now, no matter what kind of query we are sending to the SQL Server, it can be insert, update, delete, no matter what kind of query it is, the optimizer have to go ahead and grab the good enough plan from these 3 phases. Now the phase 1, phase 0 is known as the transaction plan. All these execution plans from the phase 0 are created at the pre-optimization stage. Now what is this pre-optimization stage? Pre-optimization stage are the components from the first step of the relational engine, like we discussed before, right? The parser, binder, simplification and the trivial plan. Those components will come under the pre-optimization stage. That means the trivial plans are generated here, right? So these plans are very quickly created with less amount of basic heuristics they need, like the query as well as the table definitions. Very basic heuristics are needed to create these execution plans. And these execution plans are created for the very small queries with maximum of 3 tables. Now when you come to the phase 1 is also known as full quick plan. Now these execution plans are created for the queries with maximum of 8 tables in it. More transformation rules are needed than the phase 0. Now when you see the phase 0 and phase 1, what the optimizer does is it will go ahead and grab the query which we are sending to the SQL Server. It will go ahead and compare that particular query to already existing execution shapes. If at all it finds the good enough execution plan from there, it will go ahead and grab the plan from there. But that is not the case with the phase 2. Phase 2 is known as full plan. Phase 2 execution plans are created for more complicated queries, like most of the parallelism, spills, and spools to the TempDB happens here. All the transformation rules are unlocked here. Like the optimizer, like for the phase 0 and phase 1, it doesn't go ahead and compare the already existing execution shapes for the phase 2. But instead, what it does is it will go ahead and prune off all the transformation rules that are not needed. That means, for example, if we are not using nvarchar max data type in our query, the optimizer will first go ahead and prune off all the rules which are related to the nvarchar max data type, so that it can go ahead and analyze some of the transformation rules to get that good enough plan for that particular query. That's how the optimizer will go ahead and grab the good enough plans from these 3 phases. Now our query is at the 3rd step, which is the storage engine phase, right? But before going into what happens with read transaction and write transaction, let me tell you this. No matter what kind of transaction it is, it can be read, write, no matter what kind of transaction it is, all the transactions should pass through the first step and second step depending upon how complicated the query is. If the query is so simple that the SQL Server thinks to create the trivial plan on the fly, then it will go ahead and grab that trivial plan to the execution phase and gets that query to the storage engine component. But if the query is complicated, then it will have to pass through the second step of the relational engine and then to the third step of storage engine. But all the difference inside the storage engine happens here. It happens at the transaction manager and buffer manager components inside the storage engine. Now let's see what happens with the read transaction. First, the access method component. What it does is it doesn't do the operation by itself, but what it does is it will have to analyze how it have to grab the results from the database file system. That's all it does. Once the query reaches the transaction manager component, then what happens here is, as this is a read transaction, the SQL Server read transaction, the transaction manager component have 2 types of different components in it, the log manager as well as log manager component in it. But as this is a read transaction, the log manager part will be invoked and not the log manager part. Now why? Because we are not modifying any database pages inside the buffer pool, right? We are not writing anything. So that's the reason that transaction log manager won't be invoked, but transaction manager will invoke the log manager part of it. And then it will request the buffer manager to put a shared log on the resources it needs to process the query. Now why shared log? Is because this is a read transaction and we do not want any other transaction. This is a read transaction, and if we put a shared log, we do not want it to block any other transaction, right? For the shared log, other transaction might happen at the same time, so it can share. So that's the reason the shared log. Once the query is now sent to the buffer manager component, the buffer manager will first put the shared log on the resources it needs to process the query, and then it will go ahead and check if if the resources that it needs are already in the buffer pool. That means the data pages that it needs are already in the buffer pool. If it didn't find some of them or all of them, it will go ahead and grab those data pages from the database files in the form of 8 KB pages, put them in the buffer pool bag, and then do the operations over there, do the select over there, and then send the results to the user. The read transaction, very simple. But what happens with the write transaction? Let's see. This is the third step of storage engine for the write transaction. Now the access methods by itself, it doesn't do any operation, but what it does is it will go ahead and analyze how it have to gather the results from the database file system. That's all it does. Once the query is now sent to the transaction manager component, now the difference happens here for the read and the write. Now the transaction manager will first invoke the transaction log manager, and it will go ahead and write all the modification that it wanted to do inside the database pages in the transaction log. Before writing anything to the database pages inside the buffer pool, those changes are first written to the transaction log manager. Once it writes them, then the transaction manager will go ahead and invoke the log manager part of it, and it will request the buffer manager to put an exclusive log on the resources that the buffer manager needs to process that particular query. Now, why exclusive log? Is because this is a write transaction and we do not want any other transaction to be interfering with our transaction. So once the query is now reached to the buffer manager component, the buffer manager will first put the exclusive log on the resources it needs to process the query. Now once it put the exclusive log, the buffer manager will go ahead and check if all of the pages that it requires to process the query are already in the buffer pool, or if it didn't find some of them or all of them, it will go ahead and grab those pages in the form of 8 KB pages, just like the read transaction, put them inside the buffer pool and do the update or the write transaction over there and send the success message to the user. But did you observe the database pages have already modified inside the buffer pool, but they are not hardened them into the database file system, right? That's when the checkpoint process will be kicked in by the SQL Server automatically every few minutes. Now what it does, it will go ahead and grab these dirty pages inside the buffer pool we have currently, and then it will push back them and harden them onto the database file system. That's how the write transaction works. Now let's see a very quick demo of how these pre-optimization stages works behind the scenes in our management studio. Now this is my management studio, and in this particular demo I wanted to use the SQL Server Management Studio, and I would like to use AdventureWorks 2016 databases to use it. Let me put the database in the context, and then first let me show you how the parser works. We can enable the parser option in two ways. We can set the parse only option on, or you can use this parser button inside the management studio. Now let me turn on this parse only option on, and I would like to do a very simple select statement where I wanted to see if it is syntactically correct. Now this is syntactically correct, right? So when I execute that, it should not throw me an error. So when I turn on the parse only option on, it will just parse the query. It doesn't generate the execution plan, or it doesn't execute the results. Now let me do this like I'm not declaring the variable, but still I am using it in the where clause. Now when I execute this particular statement, it should throw me an error saying must declare the scalar variable. Now let me do a select non-existing column from non-existing table. Now there is syntactically it is perfect, right? It is correct, but the components like the objects in it are not valid. So as the parser will just do the syntax, just validate the syntax, it should not throw any error. Let me turn off this parse only option off, and now let me turn on the format only option on. Now when I turn this format only option on, the parser as well as the binder components will be invoked. So basically the format only option is deprecated, but for this demo I would like to use it, and until this option gets completely removed we can use it, right? So let me turn on the set format only option on. So when I turn this set format only option on, it doesn't generate any results, or it doesn't create the execution plan, doesn't generate. So let me go ahead and validate all the objects from this particular query. So all these are valid, so it should not throw me an error. Now let me do the same select query, right? The same select non-existing column from a non-existing table. So when I execute this particular query, now the binder component will be kicked in saying invalid object name. It will validate the objects. So let me turn off the format only option off. Let's see how the data type resolution happens like I discussed before, right? We have a select statement between the two tables and we are using the union all clause in between. The ordinal column of those two tables should match in their data type. The customer ID is of an integer data type here. The sales order ID is of an integer data type here. So when I execute that particular query, it should not throw me an error, right? It should generate the results. But here I manually created a contradiction here. The customer ID is of an integer data type and the credit card approval code is of varchar data type. So when I execute this particular query, there should be a conversion failed error, right? Because the ordinal column of those two tables doesn't match in their data type. That's how the parser and binder works. Now let's see how the simplification works. In this demo, let me put the database in the context. Here, as we said, this simplification component will simplify the query by converting the subquery into a simple join, right? Let's see that here we have a simple subquery statement, select statement with a subquery in it. Let me turn on the actual execution mode on, and when I execute this particular query, we can see in the execution plan that it converted the subquery into a simple join. Here you have an inner join, right? It converted into the inner join. Now let's see how the redundant joins will be removed from the query by the simplification component. So simplification component will also remove any tables that we are not actually using. In this particular query, we are getting the results only from the sales order header table, but we are simply using the customer table. So in this particular scenario, simplification will go ahead and remove that customer table as it is not being used. So here when you see, it is only getting the results from the sales order header table. It is not touching any other tables. Now let's see how the contradiction works, right? So here this is a very simple select statement with a where clause where territory ID is equal to 1 and where territory ID is not equal to 1. Now this is a contradiction, right? Now when I execute this particular query, it should not produce any results. Now let's see how the trivial plans get generated, right? This is a very simple select query. We are selecting two columns from a table with a very simple where clause. Now let's see if SQL Server will think this is a very simple query and generate a trivial plan. Now when I execute this particular query, go to the execution plan, do the property on the select. Now when you see the optimization level here, it's a trivial plan. Now what happens is whenever SQL Server will see, like no matter how many times the user is sending these kind of simple queries, the SQL Server will go ahead and create and generate the trivial plan on the fly, and those trivial plans are not stored inside the plan cache by default. But what if there are some scenarios, right? The SQL Server, you expect it to create the optimization level as full plan, but SQL Server will go ahead and create a trivial plan for that particular query. In that scenario, if you wanted to convert that trivial plan into a full plan, then there is an option. there is a trace flag 8757. You can turn on only on that particular query which you want to convert the trivial plan into a full plan. Now when you activate that particular trace flag 8757, for example, now we wanted to convert this particular trivial plan into a full plan, the same query. Now when you execute that and go ahead and check the properties of that particular select, now here you see the optimization level as full plan. I do not really suggest you to do this in production, but even if you wanted to convert that trivial plan which you are thinking to store inside the plan cache, then you have to convert that trivial plan into a full plan. And if whenever you turn that into a full plan, now this particular full plan is saved inside the plan cache because now it is full, right? You have an option, and whenever you turn this trace flag on for that particular query, it is only bound to that particular query. It is not, it won't affect the entire database or the entire SQL server. So that's how the simplification and the trivial plan component works. Now let me hop back into my slides very quick. So in SQL Engine, its working style session, we have gone through the overview of ACID properties of transaction with a very simple example ensuring the ACID properties. Now all the relational engine databases should ensure these ACID properties of transaction for every single transaction. We have also gone through the overview of different types of memory architecture we have in the SQL Server. And in this particular session, we have gone through the plan cache and the buffer pool, especially how those caches get managed inside the SQL Server. And we have gone through the life cycle of a query for the read as well as the write transaction, like what happens behind the scenes when a query is submitted to the SQL Server for the read as well as the write transaction. We have also gone through the different types of components we have in the SQL engine, that's relational engine as well as the storage engine. So in order to prepare for my presentation, I have followed these resources. If you wanted to go in deep into learning about the SQL Server internals and architecture, please follow these resources. And I would like to thank one and all for attending this session, Festive Tech Calendar 2020. I'm really honored to get this wonderful opportunity. Thank you so much, Greg, for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Thank you one and all once again, and Merry Christmas.